This video is made possible by my Patreon supporters. Join them today for bonus alternate history content. In the 1960s, America's railroads were losing money, and nothing was losing it faster than passenger rail. To get out of federal requirements to keep passenger service, railroads struck a deal to hand over the dying routes to Amtrak, a sort of private, sort of public national passenger operator that continues to exist to this day. But what if they hadn't? It's not like a National Passenger Rail Corporation was the only idea on the table at the time. What if they had gone with a different strategy instead? What would passenger rail look like today? My name's Caleb, and this is the Alternate Universe Transit Authority. In our timeline, the Department of Transportation and the Federal Railroad Administration proposed a national passenger rail carrier called RailPax in 1969, a prototype of what would become Amtrak. After a long and convoluted process, RailPax made it through Congress, leaving President Richard Nixon to sign it into law in October of 1970, just before that year's midterm elections. But not everyone was on board. Nixon's business advisor, Peter Flanagan, took issue with the DOT's projection that RailPax would be turning a profit in just a few years, estimating instead that it would continue to operate at a loss. George Shultz, director of the Office of Management and Budget, also opposed the bill, telling Nixon that it would set up the government as a scapegoat for the railroad's problems, while not giving it enough power or authority to fix them. Paul McCracken, chair of Nixon's Council of Economic Advisors, further added that initial funding for RailPax would indicate the government's intention to continue pouring money into it, something that wouldn't necessarily be sustainable. Thankfully, these people had no idea what they were talking about, and none of their fears would ever become reality. Political pressure and pro-RailPax voices won out, and Nixon unceremoniously signed off on RailPax on October 30th, 1970. It was then renamed to Amtrak and launched on May 1st of the following year. But let's say Nixon had listened to the naysayers and vetoed the bill instead, as the news media was already fearing he would. What would American passenger rail look like today? Here's just one of any number of timelines that could have happened. In the wake of Nixon's veto, Congress, the DOT, and the FRA scrambled to come up with a new solution to America's rail problems. Various modified RailPax proposals are raised and shot down, each receiving unfavorable reviews from the White House. Finally, Congress settles on a proposal first introduced in 1969 of our timeline by Democratic Senator Vince Hartke of Indiana. In Hartke's initial proposal, the federal government would subsidize any unprofitable trains that the Interstate Commerce Commission demanded railroads keep, and the Department of Transportation would provide them with new rolling stock. In this timeline, the Hartke proposal ends up making it to the president's desk, but with one major change. In order to cut spending and make operations somewhat more economically viable, the Interstate Commerce Commission standards are modified. Routes that are absolutely critical will receive subsidies, while most will be killed. Nixon signs the bill into law in July, and it goes into effect at the start of the following year. January 1st, 1972, is known as Unhappy New Year's in railfan circles to this day, as many regional trains and almost all long-distance services disappear overnight. There are a few that stick around, most notably the Southern Crescent, but the classic passenger train experience is gone, in favor of an America built around cars and jet airliners. In the years that follow, service continues to decrease year on year. In the Northeast, things aren't quite as bad. Penn Central is thankful for the extra funds needed to run the Northeast Corridor, as well as for the purchase of new Bud Penliner coaches, powerless versions of the Metroliners introduced in the prior decade. The Regional Rail Reorganization Act of 1973 never happens, and Penn Central retains ownership of most of the Northeast Corridor. Still, PC is in a world of financial trouble, and in 1976, it becomes part of the new mega carrier Conrail. Conrail attempts a flashy rebrand of the Northeast Corridor services, with purchase of E60 and AAM7 locomotives. Still, the railroad is not passenger-oriented, the Northeast Corridor Improvement Plan never happens, and the corridor is frequently shared with fast freight trains, leading to frequent delays. It gets so bad that Delaware Senator Joe Biden, who commutes to Washington from his Wilmington home in order to be with his family, quits the Senate after just 6 years. In 1980, Jimmy Carter signs the Staggers Rail Act, which deregulates the railroad industry. The Interstate Commerce Commission now has little power over the rails, and railroads begin cutting passenger trains left and right. Casualties include Conrail's routes into Michigan and Burlington Northern's Mount Rainier between Portland and Seattle. The Northeast and Empire corridors, plus a few break-even routes elsewhere in the country, continue to see service, but it's progressively worse, and railroads are now free to hike ticket prices. The only silver lining here is a more modest version of the Northeast Corridor Improvement Project included in the Staggers Act, which provides federal subsidies to Conrail for track and signaling upgrades. allowing faster and more frequent trains. In light of deregulation, Greyhound and other bus companies began upgrading their fleets, offering faster and more comfortable trips on routes that recently lost passenger service. Services similar to the Jet and Napaway began popping up a lot earlier with modest success, and by 2023, key routes such as Chicago to Denver have comfy and reliable overnight buses. Cities outdo each other to build nice bus terminals, and taking Greyhound becomes significantly less miserable because of this. Basically, our intercity bus network is a bit more like Mexico's, which almost completely replaced passenger rail in the latter half of the 20th century, and was forced to provide nicer options as a result. As trains disappear, blue and purple states see the writing on the wall, and the early 80s see a wave of new state rail agencies designed to take over both commuter and intercity traffic. They purchase railroads' equipment and station facilities, then set about improving the passenger experience, even restoring a few services cut by the Staggers Act, including the Mount Rainier. Some agencies, such as New Jersey Transit with its Clocker service, see rapid success. Others, such as the now much bigger Metra, struggle to get off the ground. For the Northeast Corridor's passenger operation, a grand multi-state organization called the Northeast Passenger Rail Alliance, or NEPRA, is formed in 1985, made up of state DOTs and helmed by former Delaware Governor Joe Biden. But all of these entities face one major problem. Passenger operators want to bring back frequent, reliable service, but freight railroads still own the tracks and make the schedules. Some simply refuse to even consider passenger rail, since they have no legal obligation to host it. And now that different people are planning and operating trains on the same tracks, sparks begin to fly. In 1989, NEPRA sues the now privatized Conrail for extensive freight-related delays on its New York to Pittsburgh Broadway Limited. The courts rule in Conrail's favor. So the state of Pennsylvania attempts to create legislation giving passenger trains clear, enforceable priority, but this fails to pass in Harrisburg. Rail advocates attempt to pressure Congress into creating nationwide legislation empowering state passenger agencies, but passenger services are fragmented and isolated, and freight railroads are big and getting bigger, with the lobbying money to defeat any proposal. With Conrail largely uncooperative, the late 80s and early 90s see the end of Metra service to Cleveland and NEPRA service to Pittsburgh, two cities that will never have passenger rail again. America's surviving passenger operators are left with two options. On the one hand, they can play nice with freight railroads in exchange for a few spaces on the schedule. This is what Metra mostly does, and part of the reason it only has 3 intercity routes by 2023. On the coasts, however, NEPRA and California's statewide Caltrain take a more hardcore approach. In 1989, Caltrain leases several routes, including from Sacramento to San Jose to San Francisco, and Los Angeles to San Diego, and it buys these in 1994, 2004, and 1998 respectively. Thanks to subsequent track upgrades and cooperation with freight rail on the remainder of their routes, California now has much better quality passenger rail than in our timeline, and is eyeing electrification of their 3 busiest routes in the 2020s. In the Northeast, NEPRA manages to strike a deal with Conrail. Conrail will run less freight on the Northeast and Philadelphia to Harrisburg corridors in exchange for a 30-year contract to operate NEPRA's trains. But when Conrail is slated for breakup in 1998, there are 3 buyers: CSX, Norfolk Southern, and NEPRA. Now at last, the Northeast and Keystone corridors are under state ownership and control. In the early 2000s, infrastructure investment from the Clinton and Bush administrations see concrete ties implemented across NEPRA-owned tracks by 2008. Electrification to Harrisburg is restored in 2012, and 2016 sees the completion of electrification to Boston. Something like the bipartisan infrastructure bill still happens in this timeline, and NEPRA plans to use it to further upgrade speeds and introduce something like the Acela. In the summer of 2023, a Talgo 350 from Renfe, an Alstom Euroduplex from SNCF, and a Siemens Valaro from ICE are all scheduled to make demonstration runs on the Northeast Corridor, the first time electrified high-speed trains will run in North America. Plans for a Fuxing train set to be shipped from China were shelved due to sanctions put in place by the Trump administration. And now we get to today, a very different 2023, with very different trains to ride. In the Northeast, NEPRA now operates 5 routes, carrying 7 out of every 10 intercity rail passengers in the United States. The bread and butter of the system is the Northeast Connector, which runs from either Boston or Springfield to Washington, D.C. These trains usually consist of aging Penliner cars and Siemens NEPRA City Sprinter locomotives. The state of Connecticut has run the Hartford line since 1997, though frequency was low until a revamp in 2015. For the business-minded traveler, NEPRA operates the Metroliner from Boston to Washington. This uses an NCS 64 with NEP Fleet coaches, a new brand of rolling stock derived from Via Rail's LRC cars. While these trains don't hit the same speeds as our Acela, they make limited stops and are given priority signaling, cutting down on travel time as compared to the connector. The Pennsylvania Flyer connects Harrisburg and New York with much the same equipment as the real-world Keystone, and its Philadelphia to New York segment is supplemented by the Clocker, now a joint venture between NEPRA and New Jersey Transit, that remains popular with business travelers. This train uses ALP locomotives from NJT, and NEPRA-branded bi-level cars with more comfortable seating than their NGT counterparts. Finally, the thrice-daily Tidewater service connects New York with Newport News via Richmond, using diesel locomotives south of Washington, D.C. I would imagine America's passenger railroads would collaborate on locomotive orders and perhaps create something along the lines of the F40PH and P42, but this Amtrak-less timeline could also have resulted in some wildly different equipment. I'll leave this up to your imaginations. Being state-sponsored, NEPRA offers reasonable fares, often better than what we have now. However, some believe that NEPRA could function as a privatized network due to its popularity and financial viability, but this is unlikely to happen in the near future. Overall, the experience of riding NEPRA would be very similar to riding Amtrak, just without a Moynihan train haul. The Empire service is also still around. The state of New York runs frequent Pennliner-based service between Albany and Grand Central Terminal, with 4 daily round trips continuing to Niagara Falls. A pedestrian crossing exists between the Niagara Falls Empire Service Station and the corresponding Via Rail one, but no trains run across the border. Notably, the lack of a rail connection between NEPRA and the Empire Service in Manhattan, as well as the lack of a shared ticketing system between the two railroads despite serving the same city, is something passenger rail advocates would like to see changed, but nothing has come of this so far. Down in Florida, Virgin Trains USA operates privatized service between Miami and West Palm Beach, with imminent plans to expand to Orlando and eventually to Tampa. But in this Amtrak-less timeline, their ambitions are bigger, thanks to Sir Richard Branson's generous investment. They're eyeing an expansion to Jacksonville, and just last year they opened Virgin Trains Carolina, in partnership with Norfolk Southern, a bougie service between Raleigh and Charlotte that comes complete with their signature upscale stations. In the next 15 to 20 years, Virgin Trains hopes to open corridors between Nashville and Atlanta, Atlanta and Charlotte, and Raleigh and Richmond, which would provide a connection between Virgin and NEPRA's Tidewater. And while this isn't officially planned, they have released proposed maps of a comprehensive rail service within the American South, exciting rail fans and agitating people who think their trains already hit too many pedestrians and vehicles. New Orleans Union Station is thankfully preserved as a bus terminal and event space, and it features a weekend sightseeing and dinner train that runs from there to Picayune, Mississippi, featuring breathtaking views of the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway. There's talk of reintroducing passenger rail to this region, but little political or popular support for it. Out in the Midwest, Metra runs 3 intercity trains alongside its commuter operations, using 6-axle locomotives and souped-up gallery cars. There's the Land of Lincoln to St. Louis via Springfield, the Hiawatha to Milwaukee, and the Motor City to Detroit. Iowa Pacific operated the Hoosier State between Chicago and Indianapolis under state subsidies, but this service has been discontinued due to low ridership and high cost. Routes to Quincy, Peoria, and Carbondale are now under study after being canceled during deregulation, but this is mired in bureaucracy. In this timeline, the South Shore Line continues to operate under subsidy and is considered intercity rail. Other services considered as such include Utah's Frontrunner and New Mexico's Rail Runner. Out west, Caltrain has lumped commuter, regional, and intercity services into a single brand, divided into northern and southern networks. In the north, N1 connects San Jose and San Francisco, with rush hour service to Gilroy, and is currently being electrified. N2 connects Sacramento to San Jose via Oakland, with limited service to Auburn. Interestingly, until 2009, both this route and Metra's Land of Lincoln were referred to as the Capital Corridor before the two agreed on a bilateral name change. N3 connects Sacramento and San Jose via Stockton, using the route of our timeline's Altamont Corridor Express. N4 is our San Joaquins, with service from San Jose to Bakersfield, and N5 is what we call SMART, connecting Santa Rosa with ferry service to San Francisco. N6 service between San Jose and Redding via Sacramento is set to start in 2025. In the south, all routes radiate off of Los Angeles Union Station. S1 serves San Luis Obispo with limited stops. S2 serves Ventura with all stops. S3 serves Lancaster. S4, a recent addition, serves Las Vegas. S5 serves San Bernardino. S6 serves Riverside. S7 serves Paris. S8 connects Oceanside and San Bernardino via Anaheim. S9 provides all-stop service from Los Angeles to San Diego. S10 provides limited stop service along the same route akin to the current Pacific Surfliner. And S11 connects Oceanside to Escondido. Rather than California high-speed rail, this timeline's California is building a high-capacity electrified route between Los Angeles and San Diego, as well as working on conventional north-south trains between San Francisco and Los Angeles. Even though it's not as slick or streamlined as NEPRA, Caltrain has built a solid, user-friendly brand and is popular with California residents. Today, 1 out of every 5 rail passengers in the United States is a Caltrain rider. Caltrain also owns a wide variety of rolling stock, ranging from commuter-style bi-levels to single-level train sets and something akin to our Timeline's California cars. Right now, they're working on a new, standardized fleet from Siemens, capable of both commuter and intercity operation. And they have a top-notch social media team, which engaged in a brutal Twitter war with NEPRA in September 2022. Caltrain also operates a fleet of Caltrain Link buses, with notable routes including Los Angeles to Bakersfield, San Jose to San Luis Obispo, Sacramento to Reno, and Sacramento to Eugene. From Eugene, travelers can ride the Evergreen service, a 6 times daily Eugene to Seattle train, jointly sponsored by Washington and Oregon. This route was the last regional train in the US to retain the branding of its freight host, BNSF, only switching to the Evergreen brand in the mid-2000s. It still utilizes Bud equipment from the 50s, similar to some of Via Rail's trains, and is frequently delayed. Thankfully, it's due for an upgrade, with Washington and Oregon joining Caltrain's order from Siemens. A second Evergreen route to Spokane is being considered alongside this, with the target start date of 2026. Even though the traditional long-distance train is mostly a thing of the past, a few groups have attempted to bring them back for tourists. An overnight service between Seattle and Glacier National Park was attempted in the 90s, but only lasted 3 years. The Auto Train Corporation ran a car-carrying service between Lorton, Virginia and Sanford, Florida, from 1971 to its collapse in 1981 due to overexpansion. The service was revived 3 years later by new owners Autotrain LLC, who were a bit less ambitious with the service, only operating the original Lorton to Orlando route. Considered the last true long-distance train in the United States, this train was suspended in late March 2020 after several passengers on board a northbound train tested positive for COVID-19. While they had plans to relaunch it in the summer, the continuing pandemic bumped this back, and the company eventually ran out of money and was forced into bankruptcy. It's unknown if or when it will ever resume. Rumor has it Fortress Investment Group is eyeing the system for integration into the Virgin Trains brand, giving them inroads into working with CSX, but this is not yet confirmed. The Rocky Mountaineer operates a sightseeing train between Moab and Denver in the summers, the 5th operator on this route since the suspension of Rio Grande passenger service. They've also taken over the ski train to Winter Park on winter weekends. Perhaps the most interesting tourist-oriented long-distance route is run by the Navajo Nation using old Santa Fe bi-level cars, connecting Albuquerque, New Mexico and Flagstaff, Arizona, with 3 trips per week in each direction. And for those who can afford it, Executive Rail Cruises offers a litany of chartered trains to exciting destinations. The equipment used on these trains often dates back to the 1950s and is still owned and maintained by the railroads that used to run them in regular service, or by their successors. Overall, American passenger rail is fragmented and focused almost exclusively on short and medium distance travel. Each system has its own fares, structure, and often equipment. Small towns in the heartland are poorer and more isolated from the rest of the country. Alternate timeline me wouldn't have gone to DC with Calcadon to get Ethiopian food. And the intrepid souls who went a land-based odyssey across the continent are left to the relatively well-off Greyhound. Or they can go to Canada, who watched the downfall of American passenger trains and still went ahead with a Via Rail. So what do you think? What would an America without Amtrak look like? What other rail and transit alternate histories would you like to see here on Classy Rail? If you'd be interested in seeing what the Northeast Corridor would look like if it allowed competitive private operators similar to many European routes, I've created a sequel video that's exclusive to my Patreon supporters. You can join them for as little as $1.80 per month, and it helps me create more videos like this. Special thanks to Josh Does Travel, the Toronto Transit Channel, Jared Cohen, the Glen Rockian Railfan, and PensyFan19 for their input on this video, and especially to Alex Davis for going scorched earth on my script and making my thumbnail. Thanks also to the team that is building the Northeast Corridor in Roblox. Check out what they're doing in the description below. Thanks for watching. Be thankful you live in the timeline that got Amtrak, and take care until the next one.